You're here to talk about Call Me By Your Name. Let's talk about it. I'm Emma. You are now on emmatubesbooks. Don't actually know if that's gonna stay my handle, but cheers to that for now. This is going to be spoiler free if you haven't read it. If you have read it, I would like to know if you agree with the things I'm about to say. And if you haven't read it, I hope this is you trying to figure out if you should read it, and I will answer that question at the end. So yeah, grab your cup of coffee, settle in, let's get to it. I actually first decided I wanted to read this book. I was at a Barnes & Noble, I was on a trip, and I didn't buy it then, but I just saw the cover, I opened it, and I'm going to read you what I read. To be in his mouth while he was in mine, and no longer know whose it was, his cock or mine that was in my mouth. This is the first line I read. I didn't buy it then, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. So ended up buying it, really loved it, read it again, cried a lot, and here we are. Okay. So I read this book, I think this was my 5th read. It has a pretty worn spine, as you can see. I always kind of loved this book. This 5th read really gave me the opportunity to see what I don't love. I have like a romanticized view of it. I'm going to be ranking the book in 5 categories: plot, main character's initial impressions, main character's development, the side character contributions, and also the connectedness of the story, and then I'll just give some final thoughts. So yeah, let's get started. So to begin, I'm going to give this book a 4.37 out of 5, and maybe that sounds a little specific, but it's an 87%, which is a high B, and as I break it down, we're going to have categories out of 5, and those categories, when I average them, gave me an 87%. So, well, actually an 88, but this was 87.4, so we're going to go with it. Plot. I gave the plot a 3.5, which I don't know, that might be my lowest ranking. Yeah, the lowest I ranked any of these categories was a 3.5. I think that it's a really interesting story, and that Osman does a great job of painting like a perfect Italian summer, but not a lot else happens, and that's okay. I don't think it was intended to be this like gripping, suck you in kind of a novel. It's a romance. It's just talking about falling in love and stuff like that. Something I realized actually just on this 5th read was that, well, the book is split into 4 parts, and something I realized is that I really don't like the second part, like at all. And I think a lot of people do. The second part is called Monet's Berm. 100 pages of a under 300 page book that I don't like. So now you might be saying, well, how could you give this a high B if you don't like the majority of the book? Let me tell you, I love the beginning and I love the end. Okay. And I think, that's like a spectacular thing is that the beginning is so good and the end is so good that the middle almost didn't matter, right? And I think that's what Osman was going for, was that your beginning and your end can be connected without the perfect middle. And so just that on itself, I think, is really neat. Yeah, the middle doesn't need to define how the book ends. So I like that a lot. So now let's talk about the main characters and my initial impressions of them. I have to say, I love Elio and I love Oliver separately, and I love them together. So I'm going to give this a 5. That was pretty easy ranking for me. Something interesting, though, that I noticed that I thought, well, was this intentional? Yeah, I'm sure it was intentional. This book is so well thought out. We don't get a name for either of the characters till page 10, and that's Oliver we get on page 10. It's not until page 27 that we get Elio's name. And maybe that's not a big deal, except for the book is called Call Me By Your Name, right? So I'm thinking the names are kind of important, and so I think that's also neat. You learn the characters before you know their names, and the names are such a big deal. I think that in itself is really poetic. I think that this book was just so well thought out in all regards. But yeah, let's see, what else did I have? It's very unceremonious. Oliver's arrival to Elio's house. He just kind of strolls in. He seems pretty underwhelmed, and yeah, not too big of a deal. This is something that Elio's family does every summer, so it's not like, ooh, you know. And Elio usually, he said he usually doesn't really like them. It's just another guest that they have to put up with. So it kind of sets the tone for this book. Also, their first bit of dialogue really sets the tone of their relationship, because it has Oliver being pretty not interested, to be completely honest with you. Elio is trying to impress him. He doesn't think he's doing a good job. He's trying to change what he says to fit what he thinks Oliver would like, and I think that's a major defining trait for Elio. So to see that already on page 7 in their first bit of dialogue really set the tone for their relationship and what we could expect from the characters. Yeah. Then we're going to talk about main character development. So main characters, I'm talking Elio and Oliver. I gave this one another 3.5. Like I said, I love the characters, but they don't develop. That's not the point of the book, so I could give it a higher ranking, but honestly, there's not a lot of development, right? The Elio at the beginning is the same as the Elio at the end, and the Oliver at the beginning is the same as the Oliver at the end. And as I talked about before, I think that is magnificent. I really do. I think it's hard to write a character who experiences things but doesn't change. And maybe it's because we see Elio from his own perspective, and he's always telling us what he wants to be. So when he becomes that, we don't think of it as character development, or he always like belittles himself and thinks he should have done it better. So you know, like, that's who he is as a character, and he's just coming into that character. If it wasn't for that, I would have probably given this like a 2.5, because like I said, Oliver doesn't have much development. Actually, we only see Oliver as like this almost god-esque character because Elio's like worshiping him, essentially. But yeah, I think that was completely intentional. I don't think this was written to have a lot of character development in that regard. It was just a story about falling in love, and falling in love is who you already are. You don't change for the love, and the love doesn't change you. So I think that's really important too in literature, to have those kind of stories. Side character contributions. If I could have given this a like 27 out of 5, I would have. The side characters in this book are phenomenal. Like, absolutely excellent, okay? We have Vemini and Marzia and Mr. Perlman. Stunning characters. So well thought out. They're not just there to be a side character. They help with the dialogue between characters. We get to like experience the other characters through them. And I think that's really important. I would say that all of the side characters individually develop more than Elio and Oliver together. And again, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that was intentional. But it was nice to see some characters navigate these relationships and feel their way through things, as opposed to Elio and Oliver, who are kind of just bulldozing towards each other. I was most surprised by Elio and Marzia's relationship. This is spoiler free, so I'm not really going to talk too much about it, but I think that her interactions with Elio made Elio the character he was. I don't think he would have been quite as praised if it wasn't for her. And also, I feel like she's kind of a badass. I really do. I like her a lot, and she's a really great contribution to this story. I'm glad that she at least was in the movie. I know a lot of them were not, their full potentials were not met in the movie, but she's at least in it. But yeah, side characters are great here. We also have the houseworkers, Mafalda, Manfredi, and Ankise, yes, who give us a nice insight into how these characters are perceived by the side characters. Elio, it is from Elio's point of view, but he often talks about the way these characters react to things. And so Asaman is showing us and not telling us how people are perceiving both Elio and Oliver, which was a neat way to kind of infuse that into the story without telling. The other thing I really like about this book is the dinner drudgery. If you've read it, you know. If you're gonna read it, you'll know. It's a revolving door of people who his father has connections with, who come often for dinner. And I think that in itself is such a nice thing to include in the plot, because it gives us this whole new platform for dialogue and to explore how these characters are reacting to new people being like just a very small part of their story, but they can have a big impact. And I think that was also a nice touch in that regard. So my final category is connectedness. I like when a story, feels complete, or it feels like not wasted. And I'm gonna give Call Me By Your Name a 5, a solid 5. I don't know that I would give it more if I could. I don't want to give it less. I think it is very connected. It was very intentional. Okay, I think to the word, everything was intentional. There's nothing wasted here. It actually unfolds a little bit like poetry to me. And the story is infused with academic topics. They talk a lot about classical musicians and philosophers, and I think that makes sense given the story of professor's son and a grad student, and the professor and all these very educated people who are coming over for dinner. Like, that's all makes sense to me. I like that a lot. But the way it's approached is almost rhetorical, I feel like. Or this is a retelling. Oliver and Elio, they talk a lot about these historical figures and they share their stories, and then you see Oliver and Elio go through something that parallels that. So I think it was a really neat inclusion in the story and done well. This wasn't like over my head or anything like that. It was there by necessity. It wasn't overdone. It was perfected in this story, and I think that's really important to reach your audience in a attainable way. Okay. And yeah, the characters were really connected. Oliver and Elio especially, and I'm not just meaning by their shared patio. They followed the same trajectory, I want to say. Obviously, Asaman wanted to draw parallels between the characters, especially in the way Elio thinks and Oliver acts. Elio thinks it, Oliver acts it, but that's never explicitly told to the reader. So I think that he allows for a lot of interpretation, and you're supposed to find those parallels, which made the read a lot more exciting, especially a reread, because I knew how the characters were going, how they acted in the end, so I knew what the beginning was. I know that I wrote some notes about that, but I don't have all my notes sticking out here. Yeah, like here on page 9 already, I'm writing shared thoughts, desires, ideas. Yeah. So, should you read it? My short answer is yes. I think that this is a really good book. It's one of my favorite books. It's also, to me, very timeless. I mean, so for me, this book really boils down to two people loving each other, mourning each other, and loving and mourning the relationship. And so I think that really offered us an interesting push and pull kind of between the fact that, Oliver's only going to be there for the summer. Elio is not very good at asking for what he wants. And so we get this, like, a lot of tension that's not necessarily sexual tension, that's not what I'm saying, but like just internally even in Elio. So that was really cool to see play out in the book. Tangent kind of off of that. I don't think that this book is written like an erotica. I don't think that was the intention here. As the synopsis claims right here, they're trying to find total intimacy, and that isn't necessarily like sexual intimacy, right? It's more than that. It's even deeper than just like a sexual relationship. So yes, this does have erotic undertones and erotic scenes. Is this an erotic book? No, I don't think so. This is a book about falling in love. It's about romance. It doesn't even really deal with like the right or wrong of being gay in the 80s. That's not what it's about, quite simply, or those kinds of topics, which I know you get a lot in other LGBT, especially YA, which, I mean, I love that genre, and I was almost disappointed that that wasn't really discussed in here, but I realized, you know, that's not the intention of this book. So that is something to keep in mind going into it. Yeah, so if you're looking for a book that's about love and loss of time, this is the book for you, quite simply. And, you know, if you can't stop thinking about it, or everyone's like, read it, but you're like waiting for that sign to read it, here's your sign. I'm telling you to read it. It's time. I think that's about it. I will leave you with a cautionary tale. It's not like the movie. There are similar parts, yeah, there are. Some of the scenes from the movie come right from the book, but in the parts that matter, they're not that similar. So I think you'll be surprised if you've seen the movie and you like the movie and you read the book, or you didn't like the movie but you want to see if the book is better. The book is better. Okay? Like, read it. It's great. So I guess it just leaves me, I want to just share some overall thoughts on the book that aren't necessarily categorized into my 5 rankings. Well, I guess this is spoiler free. Also, that's all I have to say. This is my final thoughts. No. I really found myself seeking out passages that weren't necessarily full of dialogue or full of interaction. They were full of, you know, feeling and thought. The one thing I also say about this book is, for example, look at this whole page. That's not it's, you know, the paragraph started. So sometimes it does get a little wordy. So it's harder to follow. But yeah, it is a really beautiful book. The writing is just superb. It makes you feel things. It makes you cry. I cry every time I read this book. Every time I think of, no, not every time I think about it, just sometimes. And let me tell you, the ending is the best part. If you're struggling through the middle, just keep in mind that the ending is going to blow you away. Okay, it makes the book. The ending really makes the book. So yeah. Once you've read it, let's talk about it. Maybe I'll do a spoiler review later. Probably not, though, because I don't want anyone to stumble upon it on accident. I think that would ruin it. I would love to talk about the ending, because it's just perfect. But I'm not going to. The next book I'm going to be reading and talking about is The Alchemist. Don't know if you've heard of it. I didn't until I saw it. I only bought it because I love chemistry. That's what drew my attention. Chem. So yeah, we'll be talking about that coming up soon here. For now, you can follow my TikTok where I did a different Call Me By Your Name book challenge. That was a lot of fun, actually. And Oh, the book review on my Bookstagram is going to be up. This is day 2 of what I'm doing. So 3, 4, 5. It'll be up in 3 days. And with that will be a sweet treat inspired by Call Me By Your Name. So yeah, check it out.